Sam from DigiSearch here, and in this video I'm going to be running you through the basics of graphs in Excel. So I've previously shown you how to set up pivot tables and how slices work and how they're connected to a raw data source. So what I'm going to be doing is just setting up graphs using those pivot tables. So going back to the spreadsheet I was using for the previous example, you can see here that I've got two different pivot tables. I've got one pivot table here that's Jan 15 through May 16, just in a single order. And then I've got a second one here that's Jan through December with 2015 and 2016 separated. So what I'm going to be able to do is off this first one, I'm going to create a graph. So just by clicking on the pivot table here, you can go up to Insert, and then you come over to here to the Charts section. So what you can do if you want, you can click Recommended Charts, and then it will give you a couple options here that you can go through and you can kind of change the design you're looking for, and it will give you the recommendations there. But I normally just come to the quick bit here and just click the line graph, and then I can just quickly hover over it and it will give you a nice little preview there. So I'm just going to do a standard line graph for this one. And the first thing you do is obviously just make it a little bit bigger so we can see it. And the first thing that stands out is that visits is up here, and then conversions is down here. So because the conversions number is so much smaller than the visits number, it's pretty much sitting at 0. So what I'm going to do is just click the line for this one. I'm going to right click it, go Format Data Series, and then what's going to pop up is Series Options. Now, so it's currently on the primary axis where visits are, so it's using this number here. If I just quickly flick that over to secondary axis, it's going to move the conversions number over here, and it's going to steady the graph out. So even though the lines are the same, the actual numbers that those points are representing are completely separate because they're on the two different axes. So it makes for a much better representation of those numbers. So now that we've got the data all correct, it's time to actually apply some sort of basic design to this chart. So Excel does give you some basic designs, as with everything, and you can see here the basic ones just by hovering over them. So it gives you a couple options depending on how you want to do it, but I'd never use any of these. You might choose to do one of these, but I recommend just quickly building your own. Now, so what you do, the first thing I always do is you're right clicking on values or one of these here, and you go hide all buttons from chart. That's just going to make those little buttons go away. Now the next thing I do is I always throw the legend at the bottom by right clicking it, going Format Legend, and then clicking bottom on the right hand side. And so that'll move it from the right to the bottom. Now the next thing I'll do is I'll actually begin styling the lines, and I'll begin styling the chart itself. So one thing I'm always doing as well is making sure there's no border around the outside depending on its use. So this is obviously better once we hide the grid lines, but you'll see there that there's no border. It just blends in. It looks a little bit cleaner. Now, depending on personal preference, the next thing I'll be doing is I'll be throwing it on smoothed lines. So instead of having the jaggedy edges, Excel can actually smooth that out for you and just create a more natural flowing line graph there, so it just doesn't look so jagged. And then what you can do is just actually look at your colors. So depending on brand, you might choose, say, a better red. Then we'll make that a bit bigger. So we want conversions to stand out, and then let's chuck this on a better blue. Visits, and then just for fun, I'll throw this on dashed. So straight away, we've made an immense improvement to that. Now, the last thing here that might be something you choose to do is you go right click on the grid line, and you go Format Grid Line, and what you might do is just either turn up the transparency of it to kind of make the lines fade out a little bit more so they don't stand out. You don't want the grid lines here to take away from the actual plotted lines of the graph itself. So there you have it. You've got a Jan 15 through to May 16 line graph that's connected to this pivot table here. And now what's going to happen is, using this slicer that we created, I'm going to be able to click this and it's going to format the data here and completely change the numbers based on the appropriate channel, which is then going to be reflected over in this chart. If I click direct, it'll immediately update. Same with organic, same with paid, same with referral, and say let's go that, and we go organic together. You can kind of see the performance straight away by just clicking on it. So doing a pivot graph like this off the back of a pivot chart, it does give a better visual representation of the data. Now, one of the best things you can do with this chart is you can right click it, and what you can do is you can go save as template. So you can name this as you want, but I'm just going to leave it as chart 1. And what that allows you to do is I can go in, I can insert a second graph. And so it goes back to the default design, but what I can do is I can go to design. I can then go to change chart type, templates, and chart 1. If I just double click on that, it's going to mimic this saved design. So you design it once and you can essentially reuse it over and over, provided you've got your 2 metrics. So if you add a third metric, say revenue, what's going to happen is you are going to have to style that third line again, just because it's not in that saved template. What I'm going to do is just delete that, and I'll pull this one over here. Now, using this other pivot chart, I'm just going to create a graph again, and I'll show you the difference between the two. So we can go insert, and we'll insert a line graph again. Now, this one is a little different. Like I said, it's Jan through December, but then there's separate lines for 2015 and 2016 for both visits and conversions. So you end up with 4 lines. So what I'm going to have to do is throw both of these on the secondary axis. And then just quickly apply some styling to it. Oops, let's clear this. So what we've got here, what we've got here is red is conversions from 2015, with blue being visits from 2015. And then purple is conversions 2016, and then the light green is visits from 2016. So what it's doing is giving us that year-on-year growth, or that year-on-year loss, that this chart doesn't. So Jan 15, Jan 16, you can't easily compare the two. Whereas here, you can do Jan 15 versus Jan 16 straight away. Which means you don't really have to stuff around pulling the numbers out because it's right there. But what I'll do again is I'll just quickly style this one, and there are a couple small differences in it when I'm styling it. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is obviously matching up the colors. So what I will do is I'll take visits as the blue. And one thing I'll be doing is I'll make the previous year dashed, so it's straight away identifiable that that is the previous year. Because once you start getting up to, say, September, October of the current year, it does begin to get harder to be able to distinguish between current year and previous year just by looking at it. So by making this one dotted, it straight away stands out that that isn't the current year. Then what I'll do is do the same for this one. And there. So we can now tell, based on the dashing, which one's the previous year and which one's the current year, just by quickly looking at it. So you can see here that visits are obviously down, whereas conversions were down in Feb, but then they've spiked up massively to now be well above previous year. And again, just like the other pivot graph, if I use this slicer, I'm going to be able to easily break this down into the different channels. Paid, referral, direct, etc. So that's a graphing in Excel overview. Don't forget to subscribe, guys, and leave a question or comment below the video. I'd love to hear any feedback you've got. Thanks.